The Pulse of Providence with Steph Machado on WPRI.com.
Thank you for watching Pulse of Providence. I'm Steph Machado. In his 8 years in office, Mayor Jorge Elorza has contended with a pandemic, a crisis in education, a pension problem he inherited, and numerous public battles with labor unions. The outgoing mayor has also proposed many ambitious programs that the next mayor, Brett Smiley, will need to decide whether to follow through on. In our wide-ranging exit interview, I asked Elorza to look back on some of the biggest moments of his 2 terms leading the capital city and what comes next. Mayor, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down for what, may be our last interview with you as mayor, of course. So I just want to ask you first, you've been in office for 8 years now. What is your proudest achievement as mayor?
So to be honest with you, I haven't entered like reflection mode yet. We've been working right up until the very end. But when I think about all the changes that we've seen in the city, there's just a lot to look back and be proud of. You look at all of the economic development, what we've done to professionalize City Hall. You look at the programs that we have for young people. You have record low crime. You have just like what we've done with our park system. I look back and there's a deep sense of pride and satisfaction in the job that we've done.
So maybe you haven't decided on your proudest achievement, but can you just give one example?
Sure. As a sort of, 30,000 feet, I'm really proud that, I've run the city with honesty and integrity. And, that still means something here in Providence. And it's really, really important. I'm also really proud of how we've professionalized the way that city government works. You go from maybe 30 or 40 years ago, not just here in Providence, but frankly, almost every city. The whole point of politics was to run a patronage system. And, I'm not the first mayor to turn away from that for sure, but the city during my time has definitely taken a great leap forward in just professionalizing our systems, like instituting processes, hiring, qualified, competent, hardworking, honest people, putting them in important positions and letting them do good work. So, professionalizing our work is what has allowed us to accomplish so much in so many different areas. And then the last thing that I'm really proud of is my brand of politics. I've been in politics for 8 years now, but to this day I don't consider myself a politician. I came into public service because I wanted to tackle thorny problems and find solutions for them. And I've always tackled the biggest and the biggest issues, even when they're politically hard. And in my calculus of what to do and what to take on, it's always been driven by what are the biggest needs of the community, and then the political calculation comes later, if at all. But the point is to solve problems, and I've never shied away from tackling problems, particularly the difficult ones.
And what is something that you regret?
So, people have asked me, would you do it all the same? Would you do it all different? Truth is that I would do it all the same and I would do it all different. It's hard to explain, but they're both true at the same time. I've learned so much about the job, about leadership, about public service, and I've grown a lot during my time in office. And so, if I were to do it all again, I think I would be very proud if it all turned out the way that it has turned out. While at the same time, there are things and things you pick up over time that you wish you knew coming in. And I'll give you an example. So that I didn't come into office with a political background, and there's a lot that I had to learn, especially in that first year or so, about dealing with and working with personalities that exist in politics. I came in thinking that all you had to do was be reasonable, and that would be the expectation, and that's it. But there are folks who want a little special treatment, and they can stand in the way of your doing good thing if they don't receive the right treatment. And so that's something that I learned during the first year. The flip side of it is that sometimes coming in without knowing those things are a benefit. So I came in and I made some changes right away that someone who knew the political consequences or knew the potential political consequences would not have done because it was too politically risky. And so,
such as?
So I think the big thing right off the bat, if you remember when I changed the shift schedule with the firefighters, so that became a running dispute for about 2 years, and it was just like constant social media, in person, but at the same time, when you look at the end result of it all, the city saved by this point like tens of millions of dollars as a result of it. And so
you don't regret anything about that dispute? Because you did end up moving back to the previous number of platoons.
But we were able to lower minimum manning. And so lowering minimum manning from 94 to 88, that's a saving in and of itself of about $2.4, $2.5 million. That's structural savings. So I'll tell you, when we signed that contract, part of the agreement on both sides was that nobody would gloat. Nobody would spike the football. So that's fine. We know we were doing good work and that the end result was really positive for the city. And so, we left it at that. The numbers, they speak for themselves. But that's an example, someone coming in who does fully see all of the potential political consequences probably would never have taken that step. But I took that step and it worked out very well for the city.
You will always be the mayor who lost control of the Providence schools.
Who gave up control of the public schools.
You supported it, right?
Well, I didn't just support it. So Governor Raimondo and I, we sat down, we had lunch, and we were there to talk about education. She said that she had heard that our middle schools were in really bad shape, and she proposed that the state take over 3 or 4 middle schools. I told her that I was only interested in going this route if we did the whole shebang, if we did the entire school department, because as I saw it, the problem was the contract. So the state could take over 3 schools, but unless the contract wasn't addressed, many of the structural changes that we needed to make would never come about. And so, that was me bringing it to the table.
You gave up control of the schools.
That's right.
You have since been pretty critical of how the state takeover is going. I think the number one issue that you've been concerned about, of course, is the teacher's contract. So do you regret supporting the takeover or even pushing for the takeover now that you've seen how the first few years are going?
No, and I'll tell you why. So the alternative is not much better. Right? Our schools have been failing our kids for 40 years, and doing nothing is simply not an option. As you mentioned, yes, I was and remain really critical and really disappointed that when the new governor came in, he made all the concessions to the unions, and it really is abandoning our kids, something that is just unforgivable. And so I think that our kids were betrayed. With that said, we've pushed this issue forward, and there is a much deeper understanding in public education today that our schools need a radical transformation. Nipping around the margins and changes at the edges, that's not going to cut it. We need a wholesale transformation of our schools, and that's why we propose coming in and rewriting the contract so it's a contract that works for kids. Now that we don't have that, there is no chance or no possibility of us going back to the way that things were, because that doesn't solve things. Now we have to go that next step. We need to continue to push the issue. What are the options available to us to bring about that transformation for our kids? And that's why I stood up here with 2 other mayors and said, look, work with the unions and have them make the deep concessions that are necessary. And if they don't make those concessions, well, then that's fine, but then pursue a charterization option. Just go to a full charter model. And the idea is not necessarily to go from one to the other the next day, But the idea is to let the general public know that we actually have options. The fact that our schools have been failing our kids for 40 years does not mean we have to resign ourselves to them failing our kids for another 40 years. And unless we get the changes that allow us to turn this around, well, then let's pursue the options that we have. At the beginning of the day and the end of the day, all that matters is, are we delivering a high quality education for our kids? And if the answer is no, then we have to push and we find out, well, how is it that we're going to bring that about? And that's what I've consistently done.
You really think it's realistic, though, your proposal to maybe go to an all-charter district? We're going to get rid of the entire Providence Public School District, and the teachers will go to other districts where they feel more respected, and then what do we have? What teachers do we have to teach the kids?
So, it's a vision, and the idea is to open the public's minds around what is possible. Right? What we have today is not the only, possible outcome. There are options available to us, and while I don't think it's realistic that from one day to the next this will happen, but if we have a conversation around, turning traditional public schools into charter schools, well then perhaps we can start by, taking, historically woefully underperforming schools one at a time. And, let's say we start with the worst of the worst, and we phase out one school, one traditional school, and in its place, in the same building, we start up a charter school that's able to start from scratch and start anew. The idea is to, expand the range of options that we believe we have, and for us to push our imagination as to what's possible in public education. Because the reality is that the house is on fire on education, and it's been on fire for 40 years. And I hope that through my actions and actions of others, that we continue to push this to the forefront and instill this sense of urgency around the changes that we need in education. And I don't think anyone can say that I've acted with anything less than absolute urgency with our schools.
You mentioned Governor McKee earlier when you talked about the teacher's contract. Do you blame Governor McKee more than Commissioner Infante Green when it comes to how the state takeover is going?
Well, whoever it is that signed or authorized the signature of that contract.
She signed it.
Yeah. So whoever it is that signed or authorized, whatever. All I know is that the state had an opportunity to radically transform the structure under which our schools are governed, and it refused to take that choice. And as I've said many times, it was a backroom deal in plain sight. You make concessions to the unions, and teachers statewide will support you in your next election. It was a bare naked political play, and something that clashes fundamentally with the way that I go about governing, which is what's the problem, what's the solution, rather than take into account the political considerations.
Do you think you'll send your son to Providence Public Schools?
Absolutely not. And it hurts me to say that. I was one of these never die, absolutely public schools. And my wife and I have had this conversation. It's difficult for both of us to have reached that conclusion. But the reality is that while most teachers, in fact, a super majority of teachers out there are awesome, they're fantastic, the chances that my child or any one of our parents' child at some point in the 13 years from K to 12, the chances that they're going to have a bad teacher one of those years is very, very high. And you just can't afford your child losing a full year. And so we would love to have a traditional public school department where we'd be very happy to send our kids. But the reality is that there are very, very few paths within the traditional public schools where your kid isn't in a bad situation for at least one of their years.
And how does that feel? You've been the mayor of the city for 8 years, and you don't feel like your own child could thrive in the school system. I guess, how do you feel leaving office with that being the situation?
Yeah, it absolutely feels like unfinished business. And that's part of the reason why we stood here and did the press conference with the incoming mayor. When I became mayor, more than anything else, what I wanted to do was turn around our public schools. What I came to realize is that there is no mayor, there is no superintendent, there is no principal that can turn around our schools. It's not about individuals. You can't bring in Superman or Superwoman to turn around schools. The problems are structural. And unless you address those structural challenges, nothing's going to fundamentally change. When I saw that, that's when I brought in the state to take the step for the structural changes to the contract. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and now we're left trying to push for the other structural changes that are within our control and are within our actual options to us. And that's where the charter school conversation comes in.
Just to wrap up, are you thinking for your son charter school, private school?
We will be applying to the charter schools, and if he doesn't get into a charter school, well, we'll figure out a way to send him to private schools. And on this point, what we want for every parent in Providence is what every family with means already has. Families with means, they exercise choice every day. They move to districts with better public school departments. They send their kids to private schools. They do tutoring. They do homeschooling. There are choices and options for families with means. And that's all we want for families without means as well.
I want to ask you about your reparations program that you championed during your second term and that recently passed. It's gotten some national attention lately because it is going to be open to people of all races, including white people, which is not what we traditionally think of when we think of reparations, depending on if they live in a certain neighborhood or have a certain income. When I reported this, frankly, over the summer, I got a call from someone on the Reparations Commission who said, no, this money is just for people who are Black or Indigenous. But that is not, and I understand it's a legal issue with the ARPA money that you were not able to limit reparations to certain races. What is your reaction to some of the criticism you've gotten lately for that?
Yeah, so this is something that the commission, they talked about and looked at very, very closely. And I think that going into the work, everyone wanted the investments to be made in a race-based way, not in a race-neutral way, but in a race-based way. But I think that what convinced the committee to do otherwise was that if we did it in a race-based way, it was virtually certain that we would find ourselves in court. And even if we went to court and ultimately won, that would be like 2 or 3 years down the line. And these investments, they're needed today. And in fact, under the ARPA guidelines, they would need to be spent within about 2 or 3 years. So it's that practical consideration that convinced the committee to recommend that they be done in a race-neutral way. Now, with that said, they were also very clear that they want these investments to help address the racial equity gap. And the investments have been designed in a way that I think they're going to accomplish exactly that. So, I mean, I've seen the headlines and sort of it's like juicy and it's kind of clickbait. But, when you see how the investments are ultimately made, I think that's what matters more than anything else. And even if it's not pure race-based, if we're 99% of the way of accomplishing, these goals, I think that's pretty darn good. Something
that is still a big issue and it was an issue when you came in, is an issue when you leave, is the unfunded pension liability. More than $1 billion, it's hung over your entire 8 years. You have made many proposals to shore up the pension fund, but if you look at the numbers as we sit here, so January 2015, $281 million in the pension fund. The last investment meeting, October 2022, $365 million in the pension fund. So it's increased about 84 million. Of course, it goes up and down, but huge unfunded liability remains. Is this a failure of your administration?
So, when you look at what we've done with the finances, where we inherited the city and where we are right now, I think there's no one out there who will say that, we weren't not only, financially and fiscally responsible, but, we've turned the city's finances around. So the issue with the pensions is it's not only a ticking time bomb for the future, but it's also an issue that affects our cash flow. So pension expenses are growing at about 5%, but our revenue grows at only 2%. So, the longer this goes unresolved, the longer or the more that things are going to get squeezed out of an already strained budget. So go back about 5 years ago, what I first tried to do was monetize the water supply board. That was going nowhere. We had to go back to the drawing board. And as an example of looking back and always taking on the hard issues, we didn't settle for just leaving it there and leaving it for the next administration. Then I proposed the pension bond. First time I proposed a pension bond, it went nowhere. But we brought it back. It was dead but not buried. And we brought it back. And I think that if anyone was taking odds or making bets, no one would have expected that pension bond process to pass. But lo and behold, we built up a coalition. We had a plan in place, and we got it passed by the General Assembly. So unfortunately, interest rates have increased since it's passed, so we haven't been able to do the transaction. But we have authorization now for the next 5 years. So when the interest rates drop below a certain rate that they make sense for the city, the next mayor and the next administration, they can take this step without having to go through all the hurdles and all the steps that we went through. So we've cleared, we've cleared the process for them. The transaction still hasn't happened, but once the transaction happens, hoping and assuming that the interest rates are going to be there for it, our funded rate will instantly go to about 60% funded. And our yearly increase in pension expenses is going to go up by 2% each year, and it's going to keep track with our revenues, so it's going to be sustainable and we won't have the cash flow issues.
You say once the transaction happens, of course we don't know if that's going to be able to happen. You had historic low interest rates for such a large portion of your time as mayor. Looking back, do you wish you had pitched that earlier in your first term?
It's something that we've tracked from the very, very beginning. It would not have made sense during my first term. I think that after a while, interest rates continue to come down. It's something that we looked into actually maybe about 3 or 4 times before we actually pursued it, and it just didn't make sense interest rate wise. There was like this tight window when it began to make sense, and that's when we pushed it. Had it gone through the first year, then we could have taken advantage of the low interest rates. But we came back the next year, and now we've created this runway of 5 years, or this window of 5 years. If at any point in the next 5 years it dips below a certain amount, the city could move forward, and they could do so pretty quickly. You
touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, which is your relationship with unions. You have clashed with the teachers union, the police union, the firefighters, of course, as you mentioned. Democrats tend to be very pro-labor, and I'm wondering, as an executive, what does it say about your leadership style that you've had these clashes with the unions, and has your opinion of unions changed at all?
So, I've been very involved with the United States Conference of Mayors, and I've gotten to know, almost every mayor throughout the country, understand how they operate. And clashing with public sector unions, that's like par for the course for mayors. It's something that we always say, that there are 3 main political parties in the United States. There are Republicans, there are Democrats, and there are mayors. And mayors are just focused on getting things done. And as mayors, we're not mayors like we were 40 years ago, where the mayor is the party boss, right? Where the mayor was the head of the local political machine. Mayors today, we're city executives. We run a billion dollar organization, and we try to run it as professionally as possible. And so you're put in, you are management, and they're labor, and there's classic management labor disputes. When you look at where things stand with police and their contract, with fire and their contract, and with 1033 and their contract, I think that we're in a very good place across the board. The teacher's contract I don't control anymore, but these disputes between management and labor, that's par for the course. But where we stand right now is in a very healthy, stable place. And as I hand over sort of management and labor relationships to the next mayor, I can absolutely say I don't think anyone would dispute that the city's in good shape.
What are your plans for the next few weeks, the end of your term? Anything specific you're trying to get wrapped up? Are we going to see any deals you're negotiating that are going to come out before you leave office?
Breaking news. There's I'll tell you this. So people ask me, are you happy? Are you sad? How does it feel? The truth is that things haven't started to wind down yet. We've had so much going on, and there's still so much to do, and then we want to do right by the transition. I think maybe when the holiday period comes, and then maybe I'll start getting emotions. But as of right now, it's been nose to the grind. We've been working hard. So there's still stuff that we need to wrap up. I will tell you that when the president gets inaugurated, and eventually you see the helicopter with the ex-president. So I'll be on a minivan.
I'm not going to have the PBD chopper taking you away.
Yeah, I'll be on a minivan going skiing. But I feel so happy and so proud of all the stuff that we've seen and done in the city. From our finances being in better shape to crime being way down, the investment that we've seen, our park system, our infrastructure. There's still more work to be done, but I look back and feel really proud of what we've done.
You'll attend the inauguration of Mayor Smiley, I assume?
Of course, yeah.
What advice do you have for him as he prepares to take over this office?
There are a lot of levels of advice. For mayor to mayor, there are highs and there are lows. I think that you can't get too high when things are going well. You can't get too low when things are going poorly. One of the challenges of this office is that everything that you do is under a microscope. An approach that I've taken that has served me well is understanding that you can do a perfect job and you're still going to get criticized. So if you're going to get criticized anyways, might as well do what's right. And to always follow your conscience and do what you think is right as a matter of policy for your city. And the politics, they will come, they will follow.
And finally, after you go skiing, where do you think you'll end up next?
Still trying to figure it out. I'm looking at various things. You'll be the first to know once I decide.
I appreciate it.
But what I've liked so much about being mayor is that you jump from one topic to the next, from minute to minute, and I've enjoyed that range of, that range of topics that you work on every day, and the sort of work life that I want to construct for myself after this is one that preserves a range of different projects that I continue to work on issues that are really meaningful to me.
So do you see yourself practicing law, teaching law, or doing something totally different?
Well, I'm trying to avoid real work for a little while. So I don't see myself practicing law. But I'd like to stay involved with mayors. I'd like to stay involved on education issues. I want to stay involved in some form or another in the legal profession as well.
Do you see yourself ever running for office again?
What I can say for sure is that that's not in the plans. You never know what the future holds. I may run for something, maybe 4 years, maybe 8 years, maybe never. I don't know. The reason why I didn't run, this last cycle is, I have a 4-year-old son. I think my time is best spent and most needed, caring for my family. But if life circumstances are such in the future that it makes sense for me to run, and I feel I have something to offer that the moment requires, I'll run for office. But as of right now, it's not actively in the plans.
Mayor Elorza, it's been a pleasure covering you these past 8 years. Thanks so much for sitting down and taking the time.
Thank you.
After our conversation, Mayor Elorza confirmed this week he will be returning to Roger Williams University School of Law to teach part-time. He says he is still exploring other job opportunities to fill out his time. Our interview was also taped before the announcement this week that 3 Providence school buildings will close. Elorza suggested it could be an opportunity for charter schools to move into the vacant buildings. Thank you for watching Pulse of Providence. I'm Steph Machado. We'll see you next time.